The next part we're going to do is reconnect the cable to the bottom of the handler. Next, take the cable and reattach it to the bottom of the handler, making sure that it snaps in place. Once it snaps in place, let the handler come down and put your mounting brace that holds the cable in place on the carriage on top of it. Let it go down, and then take your 2 hex nuts that you used to take them off with and put them back in place. And now you've finished installing the handler. The last thing to put in is the QUALSTAR controller board. Remember to make sure you have your standoffs in place on all 4 of the nuts, because that's what stops you from cracking this board. Insert it carefully, and you may have to play with it just a little bit to find the right feel for it. You have all the cables in the way sometimes, so you need to push them out of the way. And it's not as easy sometimes as I'm making it look. But when you're in place properly, it slides right up onto the bolt studs that are holding it. And the easiest way to start this is just to put your center one on first, because that will hold the board in place while you do the rest of your connections. Now the next thing that's good to do, because that way you make sure you have all your connections proper, is to look at all of your connections. You have your LCD panel connection that goes right here. You have your I/O port connection, which goes right here. You have your power connection, which has to be put in here. You have your handler, which goes to the side and gets inserted here. You also have your fan, which you need to connect at the bottom here. You also have your drive bay power distribution cable you need to connect here. And you also have your carousel board that you connect here. As you can see, I've now connected everything but the SCSI cable. This is very important when you're connecting this cable, to try to line it up straight before you push on it, so that you do not bend any of the pins that are on the inside of the cable here. A bent pin in here will cause this whole library to give you SCSI errors, and it won't function properly. Once you have that in place, go ahead and finish putting on the nuts that hold everything in place on the board. And then you have 4 screws which go on the outside on the braces. You'll notice that there is nothing connected to this connection here. This connection here comes into play when we have dual-sided libraries, such as the large 412-600 or the 412-360. This is serial communications between the 2 boards on both sides, because you would have one board on this side and one board on the other side, and they need to talk back and forth. You will also notice that this isn't connected here, and the reason is because this is where we would put on what's called the HVD, or high voltage differential adapter board. To make this a high voltage differential, you have to put in what is called a daughter board. The daughter board gets put inside here. There's 4 standoffs already here, and this white connection goes right inside the blue connection on the board. You would sit there and line it up and then snap it in place. This cabling then here is what now goes outside and connects here, that goes out to your library. This is a very key component to the whole thing, because everything comes up here and it's an inverted connection up here. And that's why you need to change both this as well as the drives and the SCSI cable connections to make this a high voltage differential. You can also change these to be fiber channel libraries. The first thing you would need to do is you would take and remove the back plate and attach this from the bottom on either side with the standoffs in place. The next thing you would do is take and run a cable from channel 0 into the back of the board here. Channel 1 would go down to the first 3 drives, and channel 2 would go to the bottom 3 drives. Then take this power connection and connect it to the power distribution point right behind this cable here. The next thing you would do is take your serial cable connection and plug it in right there. Once you have those connections all plugged in, the library then closes up very nicely. Turn your screws on the sides on all 4 sides. And then you run a G-bit connection in through the bottom here, and now you have a fiber channel unit. Now that we've put our library back together, I've showed you the options you can put in the back side here. We're going to finish closing up the library. We're going to put the magazines back in, and then we'll see if we put it together correctly. Making sure all your connections have been done and properly fastened here, you put the cover back on. Once again, they're all thumb screws, or you can use a screwdriver. Quarter turn puts them back in for us. And then we will spin the library around. We will now put our magazines back in. And once again, remembering that the magazines all slide in, and you have the tongues on the library mounting bracket in the grooves on the receiver. I'm leaving face 1. I'm going to fill it with blank magazines because we're going to go into how to do a configuration of the library also. A configuration of the library with calibration is always required after you do the upgrade in the field, or anytime you have a failure and you replace something. I always recalibrate the library, because by doing that you put the library back to what's called its 0 state. It knows how many steps and how many turns it takes to get to each position within the library. So for right now on face 1, we're going to just put in empty magazines and then turn it on and see if we put it together right. Yeah. We put the cheater block in to close the sensor here, because we're leaving the door open so we can make sure everything functions. Carousel spins, zeroes up on face 1, and now it's doing an inventory scan. So far we have no errors, so we appear to have done it properly. There's the barcode reader. When you first turn your library on, you should see several commands appear in the menu screen on the front. The first thing that shows up is initializing motors. That's turning on making sure all the motors are properly set, and zeroing the carousel. Now the handler. Now it checks the gripper to make sure it's properly retracted, and then it does an inventory scan. The inventory scan then puts all the information into memory as to which slots in your magazines have tapes in them. Even though there's tapes in the slots without barcode readers, the fact that the slot is occupied is also stored in memory. And when it is done, you have nothing but a blank screen with the QUALSTAR symbol.